Rumpole and the Miscarriage of Justice. The most surprising thing about miscarriages of justice is that they should surprise everyone so much. If justice emerged as the result of an immaculate conception and miraculous birth, perfection might reasonably be expected. If judicial decisions were arrived at by some puzzled girl playing the keys of a computer, I suppose they might be more reliable, although computers appear to become hysterical and absent-minded at times. The machinery of the law has to be operated by fallible human beings, some of whom, such as Mr. Injustice Graves, Mr. Justice Ollie Oliphant, Soapy Sam Ballard, QC, you will have met before, and you can decide whether they might, on certain rare occasions, of course, fall into error. Juries, I believe, do their best, but have to contend with the soporific effects of many summings up and the speeches of the learned friends. The old Bill, I'm afraid, has been known to be only too anxious to achieve a quick result and hasn't always worried too much about injustice. And what of Rumpole? I suppose my job has been to prevent the huge, sometimes ill-directed legal machine totally flattening my client. So perhaps my concern has been less with legal principles than with ways of escape. For all these reasons, it's dangerous to expect any trial to produce a result fit to be engraved on tablets of stone and stand unchallenged for all time. It's always as well to remember the conduct of that somewhat accident-prone old darling Mr. Justice Guthrie Featherstone in the Pinhead Morgan trial. The Buttercup Meadows estate, its rural title must have been bestowed on it as some sort of ironic joke by the town planners, occupies a desolate area of the southeast of London. Its lifts are dangerous to enter, many of its windows are broken, its concrete walkways and balconies are cracked, and its walls are smeared with graffiti and worse. There is also little employment for the young men of the area, so they turn their hands to the exciting work of stealing cars, racing them at high speed round the estate, and finally crashing them or setting them alight. These sporting events are usually accompanied by fights, knifings, and the throwing of petrol bombs. Those elderly citizens of Buttercup Meadows who haven't resigned themselves to sleepless nights often telephone the police, who, with commendable courage, often actually arrive. On one such night, when Buttercup Meadows was resounding with screaming tyres and lit with flaming Volvos and BMWs, the local youths only nicked vehicles in the upper range of the market, P.C. Yeomans, a courageous and undoubtedly straight young officer with a wife and 2 children, arrived on the scene to keep the peace. He left his car with a fellow copper, but turned alone down a passageway between 2 buildings, perhaps because he saw a fight or other incident taking place. And there, in the shadows, he was stabbed in the throat and died almost immediately. Pinhead Morgan was so unkindly called by his contemporaries because, although past 20, he had the mental age of a child. He seems to have come to the car racing purely as a spectator. As other officers discovered P.C. Yeoman's fallen body, Pinhead was caught running some way from the scene of the crime. He was arrested and taken into custody. The officer in charge of the case was Detective Superintendent Gannon, an apparently dependable and avuncular man who was nearing retirement age. He was assisted in his work by Detective Inspector Faraday and Detective Sergeant Chesney Lane. Pinhead was kept in custody for 3 days after applications to the magistrates. For the first 2 he was uncooperative, and used, as an officer later testified, foul and abusive language to his interrogators. On the 3rd day he told Detective Inspector Faraday that he was prepared to make a statement about his involvement. This fact was reported to Detective Superintendent Gannon, who later wrote out a full confession, he said, at Pinhead's dictation, which the young man signed. So Pinhead was charged with murder. This clearly came as a most satisfactory outcome to the detective superintendent, who'd had the miserable task of waking Betty Yeomans up in the middle of the night and telling her that her husband had been murdered. All he could offer her were a few words of praise for the dead man, and the promise that his killer would be convicted. With Pinhead's confession signed, it seemed that Detective Superintendent Gannon could keep his word. The case came on before that master of indecision, Mr. Justice Guthrie Featherstone. Guthrie had once been a middle-of-the-road MP, a fairly middle-of-the-road QC, and the head of our chambers at 3 Equity Court before he was elevated. Presumably they were on the lookout for middle-of-the-road judges that season. On the bench, Guthrie found it hard not to open his mouth without putting his foot in it. But the words he used when sentencing Pinhead to life imprisonment with the recommendation that he serve at least 25 years must have appeared perfectly safe at the time. "Morgan," he said, "you have been convicted out of your own mouth and by your own words. Every minute this trial has lasted has made me surer and surer of your guilt." Pinhead replied by calling the judge a stupid wanker. Whether or not the allegation was true, it had no effect on the result, and he was taken down to enter the forgotten world of those who receive life sentences. After court that day, I found myself standing behind the learned judge in a Ludgate Circus bus queue. He noticed with apparent satisfaction the fact that I was reading the Evening Standard. "I expect you saw my face plastered all over the front page," Guthrie said modestly. "When one sentences a sensational murderer, one does rather tend to hear the headlines." He clearly felt that he should stop enjoying the publicity as he went on in grave, judicial tones. "Morgan was a most serious case." "Yes, and you did it extraordinarily skillfully, if I may say so." "Oh, my dear old Rumpole, one is grateful for tributes from one of your age, and experience, of course. Well, I mean, you managed to persuade the old darlings on the jury to pot Pinhead without any real evidence to go on." "What do you mean, Rumpole?" "Well, no blood on his clothing, no evidence that the knife was his, no witness saw him anywhere near where P.C. Yeomans was found. My darling old lordship, anyone can get a conviction on evidence. It takes a legal genius to secure one without it." "But, Rumpole," Guthrie played his ace of trumps, "the accused, Morgan, had made a confession, a full and frank admission of his guilt, and he signed it." "Oh, he knew how to write, did he? I wasn't sure he could even read." The learned judge was so intent on proving his case again that his bus had come and gone. As he watched it drive away, he naturally blamed me. "Oh, I'll be late, and Marigold's got people coming." He stepped out into the road, waving desperately at a taxi. "I shouldn't have stood here chattering to you, Rumpole. I must be a complete idiot." I don't think he heard when I asked his retreating back, "Is that a confession that we can accept as the truth, my lord?" In fact, Pinhead Morgan was not altogether forgotten. The questions I had asked Guthrie at the bus stop began to be taken up by others interested in detecting and denouncing miscarriages of justice. There was an article in The Guardian and a dramatized reconstruction on television in which Pinhead was played by an extremely intelligent young actor who gave a moving performance as a subnormal youth. The Bishop of Worsfield, the Cardinal Archbishop of Westminster, and the Chairman of the Arts Council called on Mr. Timothy Bunting, the Home Secretary, to express their deep concern. And then the campaign to reopen Pinhead's case was given a final boost by a machine known as the Electrostatic Detective Apparatus, or ESDA for short. Its findings were made the more impressive as it was operated in investigations carried out by the Old Bill in person. Chief Superintendent Belmont was the officer in charge of the section, which included the Buttercup Meadows estate. When the campaign suggested that Pinhead had not received altogether satisfactory treatment at the hands of the law had gathered momentum, Belmont summoned Detective Inspector Faraday and Detective Sergeant Chesney Lane to a demonstration. Belmont had found, he said, a pile of blank confession sheets in Detective Superintendent Gannon's office. When submitted to the ESDA machine, this cunning device found indentations of Gannon's handwriting on the top 12 pages. The document he had been writing was that which was put before the jury as page 2 of Pinhead's alleged confession. Now this page 2 was the only page which recorded his admission of guilt, as it contained such telling phrases as, "I came tooled up," "I'm sorry I cut the copper," "I was all excited, what with the car racing and that," "I'm sorry for what I did, it's a relief now I told ya." Detective Superintendent Gannon said in court that he had written both pages of the confession in the interview room in Pinhead's presence and at his dictation. Furthermore, he said that he had written it on pages which he had laid flat down on the table in front of him, with no page or paper underneath. The ESDA machine told a different story, that of page 2 being written by Gannon on a pile of blank sheets in his office. The clear inference was that the original page 2 didn't provide clear evidence against Pinhead, so Gannon had written out an alternative and incriminating page and substituted it later. When this demonstration, apparently so clear and convincing, was over, Detective Inspector Faraday had to admit that he couldn't exactly remember what Pinhead had said at the time, but he had always assumed that it was as it appeared in the confession statement. Moreover, Mr. Gannon had taken away the written pages after the accused had signed them, and the two officers had no opportunity of checking their accuracy. He seemed prepared to agree that a new and altered page 2 must have been written later. Detective Sergeant Chesney Lane was rather more puzzled by the demonstration, but his questions were met by Chief Superintendent Belmont saying, "There's something that stinks to high heaven about this case of Morgan, and I'll make it my business to find out exactly what it is." This and his subsequent actions led to high praise of Chief Superintendent Belmont in all the caring newspapers as being a refreshingly honest officer who made no attempt to hide the rotten apples in his force. There is only one other matter about this distressing scene which should be recorded. The original confession had, of course, been lodged in the court. When Belmont was conducting the demonstration, he showed the two officers a photostat of page 2 written out in Gannon's handwriting. Detective Sergeant Chesney Lane was asked to return this document, among others, to the filing officer. Before he did so, he felt the back of the photostat. After doing so, he failed in one important respect to carry out his orders. For a while, Guthrie dwelt in happy ignorance of this final attack on his conduct in the Buttercup Meadows case. One day, however, when he had called in at the Sheridan Club to celebrate a case that settled early, with a delightful lunch among his friends and admirers, he was told by the porter that Lord Justice Parslow, a senior judge of the Court of Appeal, was in the bar and wanted a word with him. So Guthrie mounted the stairs, alight with hope that his service to the state was about to be recognized by some promotion. I have done my best to reconstruct the conversation which in fact took place from my knowledge of the characters involved, and with considerable help from a member of the Sheridan named Toby Haringey, an appalling old gossip who plays bridge with Hilda, and who earwigged a great deal of the conversation. It seems that Guthrie had just ordered himself his usual modest gin and tonic at the bar when Lord Parslow, a small, rubicund, deceptively cheerful-looking man, came up with, "Ah, hello there, Guthrie. Drowning your sorrows?" "Oh, Simon, why? Should I have sorrows?" Guthrie was puzzled. "Bit of a hard time for you, I'm afraid. My heart goes out to you, old fellow." And he looked at the judge of first instance as though he were suffering from some threatening disease. "Keeping well, are you?" "Apart from the usual ailments of a trial judge," Guthrie replied. Yes, I know. Piles and sleeping sickness. Ha ha! The Lord Justice still sounded sympathetic. And I'm looking forward to joining you, Lord Justices, in the peace and comfort of the Court of Appeal. Guthrie was ever hopeful. Ah, yes, well, perhaps some day. Who knows? These things do get forgotten in time. Things? Simon? Panic stirred, as it so often did in Guthrie's breast. What things are you talking about? Well, let's say, things like Pinhead Morgan. I sent him down with a recommendation of 25 years, and the judge sounded proud of the fact. I know you did, Guthrie. How many has he done now? I suppose the question we have to decide is, has he done enough? Enough for stabbing a police officer? Ah, yes, but can we be sure he did that? Well, I know there's been a bit of an agitation by copper-hating lefties, Simon. Professional do-gooders, members of the Hard League for Penal Reform. Not going to take any notice of their nonsense, are you? Tim Bunting referred the matter to us. I'm not sure the Home Secretary is a copper-hating lefty, as you call it so elegantly. Look, let's go over there, where it's not quite so public. So Guthrie followed the Lord Justice to a couple of crumbling leather chairs in a corner of the bar out of earshot of the gossiping Toby Haringey. And it was in that corner that the judge realized the full seriousness of his plight, as Parslow said with chilling gentleness, Guthrie, I know you'll be brave about this. It may not be entirely nonsense. It may be just once more of these cases where the trial judge ends up with egg on his face, and God knows there's been enough egg lately to keep the entire Hard League of Penal Reform in omelettes for the rest of their natural lives. But it was an open and shut case, Simon. Now the judge was sounding plaintive. Reopened, not yet shut, unfortunately. Oh, my dear old fellow, if only you hadn't said, every minute this trial has lasted has made me surer and surer of your guilt. Did I say that? Guthrie's memory was mercifully short. Oh, yes. Nailed your colours to the mast, didn't you? Silence is golden, old fellow, particularly when passing possibly dubious life sentences. Possibly dubious? You mean you've made up your minds? No, not at all, not at all. I have no idea what conclusion I and my brother Lord Justices may come to. We may find the conviction is still safe. I just thought I should warn you. Keep your head down, Guthrie. The flak may be coming over. Ha-ha! And after this dire warning, Mr. Justice Guthrie Featherstone had very little appetite for his lunch. On the last day of Pinhead Morgan's appeal, there was a demonstration of sorts outside the main entrance to the law courts by a number of our MPs, prison reformers, television crews, and Pinhead's family and friends. Some bore placards with such legends as "Free Pinhead Morgan," "Liars in Blue," "Don't Leave Justice to the Judges," "Pinhead's Innocent," and "The Law's an Ass." When Detective Superintendent Gannon and his detective inspector arrived, they were roundly booed by the contingent from the Buttercup Meadows estate. That morning Guthrie was sitting as a judge down the Old Bailey at the other end of Fleet Street. As he was being robed by his ancient clerk Wilfred, he expressed considerable concern at the possible result in the Court of Appeal. "My learned judge," Wilfred told me later, "was all of a dither. To be honest, I never saw anything like it in anyone who has risen to the bench." "Are they giving judgment this morning? Are we sure of that, Wilfred?" Guthrie asked, as though the jury were out and he were on trial. "So I understand, my lord, from Lord Justice Parslow's clerk Gladys," Wilfred told him. "It's a troublesome business, I'm afraid, Wilfred. An extremely troublesome business. Pity they got rid of the rope, my lord. Those were my very words to Gladys." Wilfred's view of the law was as antiquated as himself. "I was perfectly entitled to say what I did say. We had watertight evidence," Guthrie argued his case. "And if that young man had been strung up, with all due respect, my lord, he'd never have come popping up in the Court of Appeal, causing us all this trouble and anxiety. Now, the point is, I want to know the result just as soon as possible. Now, you come into my court at, what time do you think?" 12:30, sir. It should all be over by then, according to Gladys. And Gladys is very reliable. That's the Lord Justice's clerk, my lord. We've become firm friends over the years. Now, do stop going on about Gladys. And hanging, too, come to that. Guthrie wasn't in the best of tempers. Just concentrate on coming in and giving me a signal. Now, let's say, thumbs up if Pinhead goes back to prison and we're in the clear. Otherwise, thumbs down, if I may make a suggestion. I'm afraid, Wilfred, and here his lordship sank into a deep gloom, there may be a terrible miscarriage of justice. But the miscarriage of justice, according to the Court of Appeal, was due in almost equal parts to the detective superintendent and Guthrie Featherstone. Now, what follows is an extract from the judgment of the Court of Appeal, Lord Justice Parslow presiding. "The officer in charge of the case," he said, "must bear the heavy responsibility of obtaining this worthless confession. We, as judges of the Court of Appeal, can only apologise to the public and to Mr. Morgan, the unfortunate victim of this miscarriage, for the somewhat unwise remarks of the learned trial judge, who was reckless enough to say, and I quote, 'Every minute this trial has lasted has made me surer and surer of your guilt.'" Down the road, Guthrie was listening with very little attention to a legal argument from Claude Erskine-Brown, when the door of the court swung open, and there stood Wilfred with his thumb, like that of a merciless Roman emperor, pointed toward the ground. So Pinhead was released, to the cheers of his supporters, and the detective superintendent had to pay another call on Betty Yeomans to comfort her once again. I had an opportunity of meeting Mrs. Yeomans later, and I found her to be a young woman of considerable spirit. I know how the conversation went, with Betty leading off on the apparently absurd result that no one had been guilty of her husband's murder. "So, Pinhead never stabbed Ted," she said. "Never cut him. So, who did it? Would they mind telling me that?" "I'm sorry, Betty. I know it's hard." Gannon was as distressed as the widow. "Or did Ted just pull out a knife and do himself? Was it all a mistake, like that trial of Pinhead? Is that what you're telling us?" "I don't know, Betty." And Gannon told her, "They seem to have lost interest in what Pinhead did. It's what I did, what the judge did, where we went wrong. That's all their lordships is concerned about." "Someone killed Ted. That's all I know. Someone's got to suffer." "The most likely person to suffer is going to be me." Gannon looked grimly into his future. "Oh, not you, Roy. Not after all you've done for us. I'm not going to let that happen." Betty Yeomans gave him her promise. If the detective superintendent thought he was the most likely person to suffer by the change in Pinhead's fortunes, he had at least Mr. Justice Featherstone as a companion in misfortune. Of course, the two never met until... but that time was still in the future. On the night of the appeal judgment, Guthrie was alone. His wife, the handsome but sometimes ruthless Marigold, was away on a visit to her sister in Coventry. Guthrie hoped that they would be too busy exchanging family news to watch the television, but he knew that she would learn of the public rebuke in due course, and she was unlikely to comfort him and bind up his wounds. He dined alone at the Sheridan Club. No one he knew was in that night, and those he didn't know took pains, he imagined, to ignore him. After dinner he sat alone in the bar drinking port, and when the occupation began to pall, he drank brandy. He was still doing this when the bar had emptied, and Denver, the barman, was clearing up and looking forward to going home to bed. Guthrie, however, seemed to be a fixture, unburdening his soul in words that Denver quite failed to keep to himself. "Justice," the judge said bitterly. "I've had no justice whatsoever." "Yes, I'm sorry about that, sir, truly sorry." The Sheridan barman had a kindly heart. "No one to represent me, Denver. No chance to put my case. Engaged in another court, as it so happened, while the Court of Appeal rubbished me. Rubbished me, Denver. The trial judge was reckless enough to say—" "Reckless, Denver? You tell me quite honestly, quite honestly, would you say that I was reckless?" "No, Sir Guthrie, but you are my last gentleman, sir." "Your last gentleman? Yes, that's probably too much of a gentleman to answer back. Not so many of us about, are there, nowadays, eh? I was just about to pack up, sir." Denver had polished the last glass and was about to hang up his white jacket. "Is that what you're advising me to do, Denver?" Guthrie looked more stricken than ever. "Jacket in, hang up the scarlet dressing-gown, take to golf." "A very good night to you, Sir Guthrie," was the barman's firm reply. So Guthrie came down the steps of the Sheridan Club unsteadily, not very drunk, but still not as sober as a judge, and in the street he bumped into someone who appeared to be leading a group of revellers, and whom he recognized after protests and apologies as Henry, who had been his clerk when he was head of our chambers. "Ah, out on the town, are you?" And Guthrie, looking round at the clerk's friends, added, "I say, are you all in the law? Oh, please accept my profound sympathy." "Not exactly, Sir Guthrie," Henry told him. "Not all of us here is in the law. What you see here, sir, is the cream of the Bexley thespians up in town for our annual outing." "And piss up," added a male thespian who was carrying a theatre programme. "That was not the purpose of the evening, Sir Guthrie," Henry maintained his dignity. "The purpose of the evening was to witness Miss Diana Rigg performing in the Living Theatre." "Cool. I'd like to play opposite her, I honestly would," the thespian with the programme said longingly. "Edda Gabler, not many laughs in it, was there?" This came from Dot Clapton, who was also a member of the acting group. "Nah, never any of those, not in that Henry Gibson," said another star of Bexley Heath, and Dot explained, "So we was all off to Bloke's for a bit of a bop." "Oh, a bit of a bop, eh?" Guthrie seemed overcome by sadness. "There was a time when I could indulge myself in a bit of a bop, before the pressures of life in the law became too much for me. Well, where is this Bloke's you go to, Leicester Square, just round the corner," and Dot extended an invitation. "Feel like a rave-up, do you?" "Speaking for all the assembled thespians here, Sir Guthrie," Henry told him, "we should be honoured if you would join us, just for a drink." "Oh, that's very kind of you, but—" he no doubt became aware of Dot's considerable attractions. That would be quite impossible." But like other judicial decisions, this one was almost immediately reversed, and Guthrie found himself a quarter of an hour and a couple of rum and cokes later standing under flashing lights and moving vaguely in time to some very loud music, in what he fondly imagined to be off-handedly seductive manner, while Doc danced expertly and appealingly around him. And even then, according to Dot's subsequent account, he was still bemoaning his lot. "Well, what was I meant to do, quite honestly? I'd go down to the cells, keep a fatherly eye on Pinhead Morgan, make sure the old bill didn't fit him up, see he had tea and biscuits and a clever solicitor. No, I can't do that. No, I simply haven't got the time. If the judges are going to carry on, we've got to trust the police, Debbie." "Dotty." "What does it call me?" No, my name's Dotty, not Debbie. Sorry. Seems I'm always making mistakes. Now, don't you worry, Judge. You're an excellent mover." The next morning, when I came into chambers, Dot had just received a large bunch of flowers, and Erskine Brown, with his usual nose for a scandal, was reading out the inscription on the card which accompanied the tribute. "From a judicial admirer, thanks for the bop." "I don't read your correspondence, Mr. Erskine-Brown," Dot was entitled to say, "so I'll be glad if you just kept your eyes off mine." "I'm only taking a friendly interest, Dot. Is it serious? When's the engagement?" "I've seen enough of married men, Mr. Erskine-Brown, not to want one of my own, thank you very much." At which point Henry, who'd been engaged on the telephone, said, "We've been waiting for you to come in, Mr. Rumpole. You got a police officer up in your room, sir." "Ah, there you are, Rumpole." Erskine-Brown was clearly delighted. "They've fingered your collar at last. Ha ha!" I did, I must confess, go through a moment of extreme unease. Was it something to do with my income tax? When I got up to my room, the client's armchair was occupied by a large, comfortable, grey-haired man who looked, as I've said, less like a bent copper than everyone's favourite uncle. Also there was the indispensable Mr. Bernard, who effected the introduction. I told Superintendent Gannon he couldn't have a better brief, Mr. Rumpole. Not one with our talent for acquittals. He saw my point, didn't you, Roy? Acquittals. That's what caused all this mess, the way you lawyers let Pinhead out laughing. His words were bitter, but his voice was low and reasonable, one of the mildest-mannered men, I thought, who ever faked a confession. You blame the lawyers for that? And I added, in fairness to our much-abused profession, that it wasn't a lawyer who rewrote the dubious page too. Gannon didn't answer me directly, but said, "I gave Betty Yeomans my solemn oath I'd get her a conviction. That's what kept Betty going, my promise to her. Someone had to pay for Ted Yeoman's life." "Even someone who hadn't killed him?" I asked. "Pinhead was guilty, all right." "Beyond reasonable doubt?" I started to look at the proof of my client's evidence, prepared by Mr. Bernard, while Gannon gave his views on the presumption of innocence. Lawyer's language. Again the contempt was deep, but the voice was gentle. "You don't believe me, do you, Mr. Rumpole? I can see that. Nobody believes a copper nowadays. The world was a whole lot better when people had faith in us. That's what I think about it." "Yes, all right." I didn't argue about who had caused the loss of faith, as I was anxious to get down to the facts of the matter. Now, Pinhead was arrested on the night of the incident. "The night he killed Ted Yeomans," Gannon insisted. "He was someone known to the police. He'd packed a lot in, I see. Common assault, affray, take and drive away, possession of an offensive weapon. So you thought right from the start Pinhead Morgan was a likely suspect?" "Seemed probable." "You were busy on the morning he confessed?" I asked. "Yeah. I went to see someone in hospital. When I got back to the station, I was met by Detective Inspector Faraday, who told me that Pinhead was ready to talk." "Yes, that's right. They'd had a short interview with him in the morning while you were away. According to Faraday's note, all Pinhead said was, 'When's the governor back? I feel I'd now like to tell him about my involvement.'" "Yeah, something like that." "So, what made him change his mind?" "Well, they need to talk, Mr. Rumpole. They need to tell someone about it. They can't keep it bottled up any longer. Then the truth comes out. And you lawyers won't believe it." "Well, he's said to have the mental age of a child. Did he use all the words in this confession statement?" "As far as I'm concerned, he said exactly what I wrote down." "You wrote on single sheets of paper? Loose sheets?" "Yes, I'm sure I did. D.I. Faraday and D.S. Lane saw that." "No paper between the sheet you were writing on and the table?" "No, I'm sure there wasn't." "You know the ESDA machine thinks differently." "Ah, you can't rely on a machine, Mr. Rumpole." I thought, well, he would say that, wouldn't he? I got up and went to the window. Then I turned back to look at the solid man filling my armchair. "Superintendent Gannon, you do understand the case against you?" "I wrote down what Pinhead said," he insisted. "You sure you didn't improve on it later, so you could keep your promise to an unhappy woman?" I hope I had made it sound as though I could understand the temptation, but he shook his head and answered simply, "I'm sure." Claude Erskine Brown had two overriding ambitions. He wanted to bring a little extra romance into his life, and he wanted to become one of Her Majesty's council, learned in the law. The fact that his wife Phillida could write the magic letters QC after her name was, for him, a matter of continual disquiet. His efforts to achieve his two great objectives were not at that time wholly successful. His pursuit of young women and his efforts to get them to accompany him to the opera led as often as not to embarrassment for all concerned. In search of the elusive silk gown, he got himself elected to the Sheridan Club, where he hoped to make friends with judges and old Keith from the Lord Chancellor's office who would further his career. So far, his membership hadn't brought him the great reward. It did, however, lead him to invite me to lunch at a time when the criminal community had apparently gone off on holiday and business was slack. I accepted with reluctance, not being greatly attracted to the sight of a lot of judges and publishers sitting together eating brown Windsor soup. The Sheridan was proud of its cuisine, less nursery food than old-fashioned railway dinners. However, I went along for the claret, and there in the bar before lunch we met Guthrie Featherstone and had a conversation with him which was to add greatly to his difficulties. So sorry, Judge." Erskine Brown started to commiserate with his lordship, as, I thought, tactlessly on the reverse he'd received in the Regina versus Pinhead Morgan. "You must be suffering a great deal." "Suffering?" Guthrie smiled recklessly. "I'm not suffering. I'm feeling, well, on top of the world, really." "Oh, you're just being brave about it." And then Claude told the judge even more tactlessly, "Of course, anyone can make mistakes." "Mistakes?" Guthrie looked puzzled. "What are you talking about? Who's been making mistakes? Have you heard anyone make mistakes, Rumpole?" "Oh, no one. Absolutely no one at all." I tried to reassure him. "Mistakes simply don't occur in the law." "I summed up in that case absolutely fairly on the evidence before me. Are you suggesting there was some kind of mistake?" "God forbid," I said fervently. Well, anyway, you look well." Claude was anxious to change the subject he'd introduced. I'm so glad you're feeling well, Guthrie." "Top of the world, old boy." Guthrie smiled with boyish enthusiasm. "There's more to life than stuffy courtrooms and summings up, Claude. Life has better things to offer, greater pleasures. Thank God I'm still young enough to enjoy them." "Oh, of course you are," Claude encouraged the judge. "At least I'm still young enough to indulge in a bit of a bop occasionally." "A bit of a what?" I was puzzled. "A bop, Rumpole. That means a dance-up," Erskine Brown translated for me. "A dance-up?" "A modern idiom, which you may be too square to understand," Guthrie said, and Claude was unwise enough to make a joke at which he laughed prodigiously. "Rumpole's not square. He's round. Ha ha!" Oh, I can see this is going to be a hilarious luncheon. By this time I was feeling quite gloomy, but then Guthrie decided to make his confession. "As a matter of fact, Marigold was away," he began confidentially, "and I didn't fancy spending the evening here among a lot of dusty old lawyers, so I took a young lady out bopping." "Oh, Claude takes them to Wagner," I said. "I suppose it lasts longer." "A judicial bop!" Erskine Brown thought the matter over. "Good heavens, I'd never have imagined it." "What I do find interesting, to be absolutely honest with you fellows," Guthrie seemed to be enjoying his confession, "is how many people today, well, let's say young women, Oh, girls, if you like, how many girls rather prefer the older man as a partner, in every sense of the word." "Oh, gerontophilia, is that the in thing nowadays?" I asked, as innocently as possible. I mean not really old. No, not in your class, Rumpole," Guthrie said, as I thought unnecessarily. "But a slightly older, judge," I supplied the word. "Well, even judge as a human," Guthrie spoke as though letting us into a closely guarded secret. So, you mean you actually struck lucky with your, boppy? Erskine Brown could hardly believe his ears. Oh, yes, Guthrie answered us with some satisfaction, beyond all reasonable doubt. Successful in every way, Claude, in every possible way. It was an evening to look back on with joy when one's bopping days are over. He looked at his watch. "Oh, sorry, you chaps, lunching with a couple of the younger members." At that time I didn't know Toby Haringey, nor did I realise exactly who he was, until he was identified by She Who Must Be Obeyed as one of her partners at the Pontium Bridge School. However, I had been conscious of him in the offing, a moist-eyed, perpetually smiling fellow with suspiciously jet-black hair and a Sheridan Club bow-tie. As soon as Guthrie had left, he showed us how much he had been enjoying the conversation by saying, "What exotic lives judges lead nowadays, don't they?" He had quite clearly heard everything. Erskine Brown smiled in a non-committal manner and led me in the general direction of the soup. As we went, I quoted Rabbi Burns. "There was a child among us taking notes." Rather unfortunate, that. Toby Haringey was not the sort to let a good bit of gossip waste its sweetness on the desert air. Only a few afternoons later he was seated at the green baize opposite Hilda, with another couple of senior citizens who occupied the afternoons in polishing up their bidding at the Pontium School in Sloane Street. It was while the cards were being shuffled, she told me, that Toby began to spread the story which he couldn't possibly keep to himself. "Hanky-panky," he said. "And this will come as a shock to you, Mrs. Rumpole, among the judiciary. Bed-hopping. I'm afraid that's what it comes to. Like those dreadful young people that go on package holidays to Minorca. You wouldn't believe the judges there, would you? But oh my, ho-ho, you should hear them talking about it in the Sheridan Club." Oh, the dear old Sheridan. Hilda as yet knew nothing of the shock in store. Rumpole must get round to joining it. Toby started to deal out the cards and the information. "There was a judge holding forth in the bar the other day. What do you think it was on about? Points of law? Reform of the jury system? Oh, not at all. It was all about how he'd taken some young popper to a discotheque, and how girls prefer the older man as a partner in every sense of the word. Honestly, ladies, it was quite shocking to an old gentleman like me. You probably know the judge I'm talking about, Mrs. Rumpole." "Oh, probably," Hilda said casually. "Rumpole's friends with so many judges." "A tall chap, always looking terribly nervous. Let me see, Fotheringay, Feather something, Feather. Toby was now sorting out his hand. "Not," Hilda was almost afraid to ask, "not Featherstone?" That's it, Mr. Justice Featherstone. Ha! Wouldn't like to be hauled up before him, would you? Not after he'd spent a hard night of hanky-panky in the discotheque. Ha! Your shot, Mrs. Rumpole." Guthrie Featherstone. Oh, dear. Hilda could hardly bring herself to count her points. She was already beginning to wonder if it were not her clear duty to see that Marigold knew. The more I thought about the defence of Detective Superintendent Roy Gannon, the less I gave for our prospects. Neither the judges nor the police were having a good time that year, and they seemed to have sunk in the public estimation to the level of traffic wardens and income tax inspectors. The electrostatic detective apparatus was enjoying a period of considerable success. It had proved a number of confession statements unacceptable, and a jury would be unlikely to prefer the evidence of a senior copper out to avenge the death of one of his men to that of an independent machine. I couldn't see any way out of this impasse, and didn't do so until I met Betty Yeomans, the murder victim's widow, which I did in an unexpected way. I was setting out to do an uninteresting robbery in Acton Crown Court, and on leaving my chambers and walking up Middle Temple Lane, I heard someone calling, "Mr. Rumpole!" I turned and saw a youngish, dark, and fairly attractive woman leaning her head out of the window of a battered motor car of indeterminate age. "I'm Betty Yeomans," she said as I approached her. "I've been meaning to have a word with you, Mr. Rumpole. You going anywhere?" I told her my destination. She said, "Jump in the minicab. I'll give you a free ride. No probs." I thought this remarkably kind of her, and indeed she drove me to Acton very quickly, and with a good deal of expertise, but our conversation was frequently interrupted as she shouted abuse at other road users. As she kept all the windows shut after we started, the only person to be affected by these outbursts was me. "Friend of Roy Gannon's got me this mini business, so he offered me a job, part-time, suits me. I do the hours, and I can look after the kids as well." Do you want to tell me something?" "The world's full of wankers," she shouted suddenly. "Have a bit of bloody courage, mate." This was directed at a car waiting to turn into the Fleet Street traffic. "We can't all wait while you say your prayers." And then in a more conversational tone, "Roy's been wonderful to me and the kids, Mr. Rumpole, since we lost Ted." "Oh, come on, madam, the light's gone green. Are you colour-blind or something?" I don't think she can hear you." "No, I know, but it makes me feel better. Just like Roy made me feel better when he got our conviction." "Yes, but was it the right one? Isn't that the point?" "Do you think he lied, Mr. Rumpole, just to give me the satisfaction?" "Oh, no. He's not like that, Roy isn't." "Oh, mind yourself. What are you doing, driving on your television licence?" "No, straight copper. Roy's not the one Ted used to talk about." "Oh? Ted was talking about someone?" I was becoming interested. "Oh, I know he was only a uniform man. Ted was never that ambitious. But his friend, the one he was at school with, he's the high flyer, went straight into the CID and got detective sergeant. We used to see a lot of them, though, him and Doreen. Our kids were the same age." "Mrs. Yeomans, what are you trying to tell me?" "Why don't you go home and take driving lessons?" "Oh, sorry, Mr. Rumpole." "No, that's all right. I'm getting used to it." "Well, it was after Mr. Pertwee got convicted. There was someone else Ted's friend was worried about, but it wasn't Roy. He always said, 'Superintendent Gannon's clean as a whistle,' not like some others I could mention." "Oh? Who said that?" My interest was increasing. "Oh, didn't I tell you? It was Chesney, of course." "Oh, get a move on. What do you think this is, a funeral procession?" Over the sound of her furious hooting, I repeated, "Chesney?" "Yeah, we all got on so well together. Haven't seen much of them, though, not since Ted went. Neither him nor Doreen Lane." Ah, now I remembered. Detective Sergeant Chesney Lane was one of those present when Pinhead Morgan was supposed to have signed the dubious confession. After Mrs. Yeomans had vented her wrath on a taxi driver who had apparently cut her up, I asked her to tell me more. "After my exciting ride with Betty Yeomans, I met the indispensable Mr. Bernard in the Acton court. During the lunch adjournment, we went round the corner for a Guinness and a slice of pie. Bernard, in his line of business, had to associate fairly closely with the old Bill. He attended their dinner dances, bumped into them at the Rotary Club evenings, and was on Christian name terms with the officers of that section which included Buttercup Meadows. Relying on his fund of knowledge, I asked him what he knew about the Pertwee business. "Oh, dear." My instructing solicitor looked a little shifty. We never got instructed in that case, Mr. Rumpole, otherwise you'd have had the brief. Truly, quite definitely." "Yes, all right. What was it all about?" Superintendent Pertwee. Some people wanted to get rid of him. I never discovered who or why exactly. It started with all sorts of minor persecutions. They actually did him for speeding when he was out with his family. Then he was said to be friends with a big local villain. Finally, they got Jim Pertwee on a charge of perverting the course of justice, planting dope on a suspect. Although I was never sure who did the planting. Got 2 years. Still at it. You interest me strangely. Now, Bonnie Bernard, I have work for you. Yes, you usually have, Mr. Rumpole. Detective Sergeant Chesney Lane. Cultivate his friendship, will you? There might be something he'd like to tell us. So the industrious Bernard got to know a good deal about the life and habits of Detective Sergeant Lane. His firm had, as it so happened, helped the Lanes over a mortgage, and as he knew other parents at the school the Lane children attended, he called on the Lanes one Sunday afternoon to discuss a sponsored marathon to raise money for books. He was told by Mrs. Lane that her husband had taken their boys to the skateboard rink in the local park, so, as the young Lanes slid and trundled about, Bernard and Chesney Lane, in their weekend uniforms of jeans and chunky patterned sweaters, with Bernard leading his elderly spaniel, discussed my encounter with Mrs. Yeomans. "Betty doesn't want Roy to go down for this," Bernard began. "Ted wouldn't have wanted it either. Of course, you were pretty close to Ted, weren't you, Chesney?" "Oh, yeah. Ted was an honest policeman. Perhaps that's why he stayed in uniform." "Well, Ted would have wanted justice done." What's justice when it's at home?" Detective Sergeant Lane sounded bitter. "Well, I mean, has Pinhead got justice? Or Betty, with no one nicked after all this time? And Roy's the only one left to take the blame." "I know that. I know it. I've lost sleep over it." "Well, you might sleep better after you've told someone," Bernard said quietly. "Doreen doesn't think so. Doreen thinks I ought to keep my head down." "Well, what do you think?" For a while, Bernard told me, Chesney Lane said nothing. And then he called the protesting boys away from their skateboards, as it was time to go home for tea, and he extended a welcome invitation to my solicitor. "You want to come with us? I might have something to show you." As events moved toward the trial of Detective Superintendent Gannon, which was also to become in more ways than one the trial of Mr. Justice Featherstone, a further conversation took place between the judge and Lord Justice Parslow in the bar of the Sheridan. It started, to the surprise of my informants, by Parslow saying, "Well, Guthrie, your ears should be burning. I've been having a little chat with the Lord Chief about you." Nothing about dancing, was it? The judge was never at a loss for something to feel guilty about. "Oh, well, hardly. I mean, I don't suppose the Lord Chief dances much nowadays." Do you dance, Guthrie?" "Dance? No, of course not. Well, hardly at all. Well, only when I'm particularly depressed, which, of course, is almost never." "Then why are we talking about it?" I don't know. It's probably quite irrelevant." "Yes, it is. Totally irrelevant. Shall we take our drinks over to the fire, away from the audience?" Now, I can't even give hearsay evidence on what was then discussed, but I'll lay a small bet that the appeal judge told Guthrie that, having made an absolute pig's breakfast of the Morgan affair, he was to have a chance of redeeming himself by conducting the trial of Detective Superintendent Gannon, who had apparently misled the court and forged a confession. Well, to this the judge agreed enthusiastically. Of course, he said, rotten apples must be plucked out of the police barrel and destroyed. The last words of the Lord Justice, overheard by a passing member, were, "Right, that's settled then. Oh, by the way, Guthrie, I'd advise you to give up dancing. You're probably far too old for it." Ha-ha! In spite of this grave warning, Guthrie no doubt felt cheered by this conversation, and the trust the powers that be were putting in him. However, his happiness was not long-lasting. When people talk about doing things in the interests of justice, I found it usually means that the act they're about to perform will be extremely unpleasant. Hilda felt that it would be fair to Marigold to tell her about the ill-fated Bop and the admissions of guilt attested to by the earwigger Haringey. As I have said, Marigold Lady Featherstone is a handsome and stylish woman, much given to shopping in Harrods, who has very little time for the weakness of the male sex in general, and her husband in particular. Hilda told me how Marigold had passed judgment on the judge. "Look, you're not the greatest catch in the world, Guthrie," she told him, "and little Miss Watsit is perfectly welcome to you as far as I'm concerned. But why couldn't you keep quiet about it? How do you think I felt having Hilda Rumpole being sorry for me in the Silver Grill? Let's face it, you've got absolutely no judgment, Guthrie. That must come as something of a drawback in your profession." I also gather from Hilda that the judge asked if his wife intended to leave or forgive him. To this Marigold replied, "I'm not going to do either. Leaving would make things far too easy for you. I'm going to stay here and not forgive you. Now, run along and try that bent copper, and please, Guthrie, do try not to make another cock-up." So it was not an entirely happy Mr. Justice Featherstone who took his place on the bench as the trial of Detective Superintendent Gannon started at the Old Bailey. Miles Crudgington, Q.C., was a tall, willowy fellow with a carefully cultivated, classless accent. He specialized in civil rights cases, those involving free speech, the liberty of the subject, and miscarriages of justice. As a general rule, he would not have been called on to appear for the Crown, but prosecuting the police was no doubt a worthy occupation for a radical lawyer. So there was the learned Miles leading for the Queen in her suit against my unfortunate detective superintendent. Fairly early in the proceedings, my opponent was calling Detective Inspector Faraday a square-shouldered, square-headed officer who answered all questions in a voice like a machine gun, and whose face it would be hard to imagine lit up with a smile. Sir, Superintendent Gannon was the only one writing down what Morgan was saying. He was. Without the help of that so-called written confession, could you remember exactly what Morgan said? No, not exactly. Thinking back to that time, are you absolutely sure he said, "I'm sorry I cut the copper"? Are you sure he said that? There was a silence, and then the witness's answer came rattling out. No, sir, I'm not sure he said that at all. So, Miles Crudgington drew the ponderous deduction. It appears that Detective Superintendent Gannon was writing down words that Morgan didn't say, completely ignoring that young man's human rights. Is that the situation? Perhaps I could remind my learned friend, I clambered to my feet, that detective superintendents have human rights also, and one is that hostile witnesses should not be asked leading questions. Mr. Crudgington was just drawing the obvious conclusion. Guthrie came to the aid of the prosecution. Yes, and ignoring all other possibilities, as is the way with those who talk about human rights for a carefully selected minority. My lord, I'm quite prepared to play the game by Mr. Rumpole's somewhat outdated rules. Crudgington tried to earn brownie points. Not my rules, the rules of evidence. Have they gone out of fashion among radical barristers? Perhaps you should rephrase your questions, Mr. Crudgington. No, my lord, I am content to leave the matter to the jury. And the great defender of the oppressed, no doubt having forgotten what his question was anyway, sat down, not apparently discouraged by what I thought was a particularly shrewd attack. Detective Inspector Faraday, you gave evidence at the trial of Pinhead Morgan, I said, as I rose to cross-examine. I did, yes. At that time, you had no doubt that Pinhead had said what was written in the confession. I couldn't recall exactly what he said, but had no reason to doubt what Mr. Gannon had written. The answer came out like automatic fire. And have you now? Well, since Chief Superintendent Belmont showed us the test, he proved page 2 had been written later. Was Mr. Gannon asked to attend that demonstration? I tried to make it sound as though it was a matter of casual importance. Not so far as I know. Were you and the sergeant being asked to gang up on Mr. Gannon? My lord, The radical QC rose in his wrath. "That is an outrageous suggestion. Chief Superintendent Belmont hasn't had a chance of answering that very serious accusation." "Oh, you mean Chief Superintendent Belmont has human rights, even though he's a policeman?" I asked politely. "He has a right to answer these charges, so I shall be calling him as a witness, my lord." Now this was exactly what I wanted. So instead of looking delighted that Crudgington had fallen into my small trap, I looked worried, and only reluctantly agreed to Belmont being added to the list of prosecution witnesses. When that was settled, I turned back to the DI with just one other matter. Pinhead had refused to talk during his first 3 days in custody? Yes. Then you saw him without Superintendent Gannon being there? Detective Sergeant Lane was present on that occasion? Yes, I know he was. And then I put the question I owed to Mr. Bernard's industry. Did you tell him that unless he made a confession you'd hand him over to Ted Yeoman's mates and they'd do him over in a way he wasn't likely to forget? There was a rather unusual pause, but finally the answer shot out as loudly as ever. "No, I did not tell him that." "But by a remarkable coincidence," I said, "the next day he talked at length to the superintendent, and did so the minute Mr. Gannon arrived back at the station from his hospital visit." "Yes, but I don't think it was exactly the statement that's been produced in court." "Not exactly the statement produced in court." Guthrie noted down the answer carefully, and then he said, "Have you any more questions, Mr. Rumpole?" "No, not at the moment, my lord." "Then I shall rise for a few minutes," the judge told us all. "Oh, public business, my lord?" I asked, because that was the excuse given for all his lordship's absences, whether caused by the need to visit the gents, place a bet, or on one famous occasion to help organize industrial action by the judiciary. On this occasion he said, "No, Mr. Rumpole, it's an entirely private matter," and he went off to telephone his wife once more and appealed to her to forgive him. The hard-hearted Marigold later told Hilda what her answer was. "Sorry, Guthrie, you've lost your appeal." She then put down the telephone. The operator of the Erster machine gave evidence as to the results of the test, and now the man I had been waiting for, Chief Superintendent Belmont, stood in the witness box and answered Miles Crudgington's questions more in sorrow than in anger. He said he had always regarded Roy Gannon as a competent and honest officer until the ESDA test proved otherwise. He had arranged the test because of questions that were being asked about Morgan's competence to make a confession. He had hoped that the result would exonerate his force, and was deeply disappointed when it did not do so. There was no question of ganging up on Mr. Gannon, but he wanted to test the recollection of the other officers without any prompting from their superior. He would be pleased to stay in the box and answer any questions Mr. Rumpole might care to ask. "You took a pile of blank confession forms out of Superintendent Gannon's office for the purpose of your test," I said. "Did you do that surreptitiously?" "I don't think he knew about it. He was on holiday." "And was he on holiday when you demonstrated what you assumed to be his guilt to Inspector Faraday and Sergeant Chesney Lane?" "I don't think so." "But you didn't tell him what you were doing behind his back?" "At that stage I didn't trust Mr. Gannon altogether." The deadly answer was given with a smile to the judge, who nodded back his total understanding of the position. I pressed on undiscouraged. "So, what did you do?" "I made a report about the information I'd obtained. That was communicated to the Director of Public Prosecutions and then to Mr. Morgan's solicitors." "So he was set free by the Court of Appeal?" "Yes." "And Superintendent Gannon's left to face the music?" "If he orchestrated it, yes." "You had another officer, didn't you, convicted for perverting the course of justice? A Superintendent Pertwee? Oh, you do get the occasional rotten apple, Mr. Rumpole. Well, your particular barrel seems to be unusually full of rotten apples, doesn't it, Chief Superintendent? May I suggest where the corruption starts? Oh, certainly. Where? At the top, with you. The Chief Superintendent didn't seem in the least startled. He went on smiling politely and said, "That's a very interesting suggestion. Mr. Rumpole, I'm sure you understand. You're taking a great risk in making these accusations against the Chief Superintendent." Guthrie was affecting deep concern, as though trying to save the mad old Rumpole from committing forensic suicide. "A risk," I said. "Oh, well, we all have to dance on thin ice from time to time, don't we, my lord?" And I continued my attack on the charming Belmont. "I don't know what you were up to exactly," I told him, "and I don't suppose many of the CID officers knew either. But Superintendent Pertwee rumbled you, whatever it was. So he had to be persecuted, accused of associating with criminals, and then have a false charge of planting dope trumped up against him. Pertwee was convicted after a trial by jury." Belmont's voice was only a little harsher, but slightly less reasonable. "Oh, yes, Chief Superintendent, and so was Pinhead Morgan. Did my client, Mr. Gannon, come to you and say that he thought Pertwee might have been framed?" "I don't remember that." "And was that why you had to get rid of Gannon also? And was that why you had to make it look as though he'd forged a confession?" "So far as I was concerned, he had forged a confession." "So far as you were concerned. It may interest the jury to know just how far that was. Just look at that document, will you?" And by now the usher had reached Chief Superintendent Belmont with my trump card and prize exhibit. He glanced at it with an apparent lack of interest. "Is that a photostat copy of page 2 of Morgan's confession?" "Apparently. The handwriting is Mr. Gannon's?" "It would seem to be." "Feel it with your fingers, Chief Superintendent. Look at it very closely, front and back. Has someone gone over every letter with a pointed object, pressing down hard?" Belmont went through the operation half-heartedly, and then, in a silent courtroom, he said, "I can't tell." "Oh, yes, you can. I suggest someone did that so the impression of the letters would appear on the blank pages under it. Then it would look to the machine as if page 2 had been written later. You're not suggesting that Mr. Gannon manufactured this evidence against himself, are you?" At last the witness was at a loss for words, but his lordship asked me where the document in question had come from. "From the Chief Superintendent Belmont's office," I was able to tell him. I suppose I hadn't totally obliterated the once entirely confident Belmont. He hadn't fainted or burst into tears or begged the judge to release my client without a stain on his character, or confessed to perverting the course of justice. But as cross-examinations go, I felt it rated at least 9 out of 10, and I went down to the cells with the attendant Bernard, expecting a word or two of gratitude. What I got was something entirely different. I might have been an uncooperative murder suspect Gannon had to interview, as he greeted me with, "What the hell are you doing, Mr. Rumpole?" "Defending you, and rather well, though I say it myself." "All that you put to the Chief Superintendent. What's the public going to think?" "What's the jury going to think? That's what interests me." But Roy Gannon was thinking of wider issues, and they clearly worried him. If that's going on at Chief Superintendent level, who are they going to trust? "Oh, come on, Mr. Gannon." I tried to bring him back to the business in hand. "You had your suspicions about Pertwee's conviction, and that was why Belmont was out to get you." "You can't prove that." "We've got a witness, Roy," Bernard told him. "Who?" "Chesney Lane. We weren't certain he'd come out with it in the witness box. They've been trying to shut him up, apparently." "I don't blame them," Roy Gannon nodded, understanding his enemies. "Let young Chesney blow the whole division, the Chief Superintendent, and Jeff Faraday. That's really going to take the tin lid off it. I imagine he's going to tell the truth. I'd never had a less self-interested client. Do you think that's going to make it any better? The detective superintendent looked doubtful. Better for you. We might even get you off. I mean better for the police. It was time, I realized, to make my position clear, so I gave him half a minute of the Rumpole creed. Now listen to me, Mr. Gannon, listen. The police, the judges, the public interest, the interests of justice, all those big words, those big ideas, they're too much for me, altogether too much. I've got a job to do. Maybe it's a small job, but to me it seems important. I am here to see that no one gets banged up for a crime they probably didn't do. But that is quite likely to happen to you unless you help me. But Gannon still looked doubtful and shook his head. I don't want young Chesney saying all that out in public. You think about it, Roy, Mr. Bernard told him. You've got until tomorrow to think about it. The next morning, Miles Crudgington was in a particularly confident mood. No doubt he thought that I'd shot my bolt with Belmont and had no evidence to support the attack. So he told the judge that Detective Sergeant Chesney Lane could corroborate D.I. Faraday's evidence. He would therefore tender him as a witness in case Mr. Rumpole had any questions. Mr. Rumpole had plenty of questions. But would his client let him ask them? I turned to take instructions and saw Mr. Bernard standing by the dock muttering to our client. "Have I any questions?" I asked in a resonant whisper. To my relief, it seemed that good sense and Bernard had prevailed, and Gannon gave a reluctant nod. So I turned in the friendliest manner towards the witness. Detective Sergeant Lane, since you made your original statement, have you thought further about the matter? Yes, I have. And now? Now I want to tell the truth. The answer riveted the attention of the jury and took the judge by surprise. My opponent seemed about to rise and object, but then thought better of it. So I ploughed on steadily. When you and Detective Inspector Faraday were alone with Pinhead, did Mr. Faraday say anything to him? He said he'd get Ted Yeoman's mate to do him over. Did Mr. Gannon know anything about that threat? Not that I know of. But the next day, Pinhead Morgan made a confession to the superintendent. Yes, he did. He said, "I'm sorry I cut the copper. I was all excited, what with the car racing and that." You heard Pinhead say that? Yes, I did. Can you tell whether he said it because Detective Inspector Faraday had threatened him, or because it was true? And my opponent could no longer keep still. How can he possibly answer that? Thank you, Mr. Crudgington, I said. I'm grateful to my learned friend for giving the answer I wanted. And having disposed of the interruption, I turned back to the witness. Mr. Lane, is that a photostat of page 2 of the confession Mr. Gannon wrote out? Once again, the usher took the trump card back to the witness box. Yes, it is. What can you tell us about it? Chesney Lane picked up the page and felt it with his fingers, and discovered the secret of the case like a blind man reading Braille. Someone's gone over every letter with something pointed, pressed down hard on the paper. I imagine that was done to show indentations on the sheets under it. Oh, don't let's have what he imagined, the radical lawyer was up again. Yes, I quite agree. Let's have only what he knows to be true. Where did you find that document? And then Detective Sergeant Lane told us. It was in a file I brought from Chief Superintendent Belmont's office. It looked as though someone was trying to frame Roy Gannon, so I decided to keep hold of it. Thank you very much, Mr. Chesney Lane, and I was in fact exceedingly grateful. Just wait there, will you, in case my learned friend can think of something to ask you. After this evidence, despite Miles Crudgington's heroic efforts to discredit another copper, the jury's verdict was a foregone conclusion. When it had been delivered, I parted with my client, who still looked saddened by the way I'd won his case, at the Old Bailey entrance. It's a funny thing, he said. When Pinhead was found innocent, there were cameras and crowds and cheering supporters. It's very quiet now, isn't it? I thought, on the whole, this was how I'd wanted it. In spite of my client's doubts and reservations, I'd had what I thought of modestly as a bit of a triumph in court. And before I got back to my chambers in Equity Court, I was able to solve another mystery. Coming up Fleet Street, I saw our new secretary, Miss Dot Clapton, coming out of the take-a-break sandwich bar with her lunch in a paper bag. She was clearly hungry as she withdrew a sandwich, took a furtive bite, and then popped it back into the bag as she heard me call, "Oh, Dot, just a word if you'd be so kind." "Oh, been buying your sandwiches, have you?" "Is that what you wanted to ask me?" No, not exactly. Been dancing with any more judges lately?" "Oh, you heard about that?" Dot smiled engagingly. "Poor old chap, he was looking that miserable, and he danced so funny, the way my dad used to." "Yes, so you danced. Well, I can understand that. Even judges may feel the need to dance occasionally. But Dot, And then I tried to frame a question as difficult as any I'd had to ask in even the most delicate case. "Oh, look, you'll have to help me. After the ball was over, was there anything? I mean, any sort of, Dot was quick to come to my assistance. "Did we knock it off? Is that what you mean?" Yes, well, it probably is. "Oh, do me a favour, Mr. Rumpole, you've got to be joking." Yes, I probably am." Dot Clapton was still laughing as I left her to her sandwiches. She was, if anyone ever was, a reliable witness. I don't often play bridge, but when I heard that Hilda was going to sit down to cards with Marigold Featherstone and a woman called Josephine Tasker, who couldn't count her points, I decided, in the absence of any more serious crime, to join them. I partnered Hilda, and at the end of one game, she who must be obeyed and I were 6 down. When she accused me of overbidding in the most ridiculous manner, I had to agree. Yes, well, I was boasting, I told them. And when Josephine Tasker left the table to order tea, I repeated, yes, I was boasting, without a word of truth, just like poor old Guthrie. "Oh, Guthrie?" Marigold Featherstone pricked up her ears. "Why do you say, like poor old Guthrie?" "Well, he had no points, but he bid high. He'd only gone for a drink with our clerk and the amateur actors, but he boasted of some great amorous conquest. Of course, no one could ever be foolish enough to believe him." "You mean nothing happened?" Marigold seemed never to have considered the possibility. Nothing whatsoever. When I inquired of the young lady concerned, she burst into laughter at the mere idea." "Oh, laughter? I really don't see that Guthrie's as funny as all that." Lady Featherstone looked a trifle miffed. "I think what so upset Marigold Rumpole," Hilda explained, "was that Guthrie should have discussed it in the Sheridan Club." "Yes," Marigold agreed. "Why on earth should he do that?" "Oh, don't you know?" I asked them both. "Because the poor chap was so terribly unhappy." "Unhappy?" Marigold was incredulous. "What on earth's Guthrie got to be unhappy about?" "Well, he'd been piddled on from a great height, hadn't he?" "Rumpole," Hilda warned me, "you are in my bridge club." Yes, sorry, Hilda. Well, I mean, he's had a considerable amount of dirty water thrown over him by the Court of Appeal. And then the one woman he ever really loved was far away, and he was missing her dreadfully. So he just tried to cheer himself up. Well, perhaps he danced a step out of time to the music, that's all, nothing more. But he confessed. There is no evidence more unreliable than a confession. Don't imagine people tell the truth about themselves. They'll say all sorts of things because they're afraid or vain or want to boast about things they never did to impress a few chaps in the club. Guthrie's confession would never have got past the Court of Appeal. Oh, really? Is that what you think, quite honestly? Absolutely sure of it. And who is this only woman he's ever really loved, in your opinion? Someone not a million miles away from this table, Marigold. There's only one other thing. Marigold had been sleeping behind a locked door in the matrimonial bedroom, while Guthrie passed unhappy nights in the spare room. After our afternoon's bridge, he later told Hilda, she at last opened the door to his lordship's tentative knock. "You may come in now, Guthrie," his wife told him. "But for heaven's sake, don't boast about it in the Sheridan Club."